Okay.
Well, it's 5 past, so why don't we?
Should we just kick off then?
Yeah. Let's kick off and just hope that people can hear us.
Okay then. Well, welcome to the launch of Helen Grant's new novel, Too Near the Dead. I'm Lalla Merlin, and I'm going to be asking Helen some questions about the book and its influences. Helen has a passion for ghost stories and the Gothic. She's been described by Joyce Carol Oates as a brilliant chronicler of the uncanny and is a lifelong fan of ghost story writer M.R. James. She's spoken at 2 M.R. James conferences and appeared at the Dublin Ghost Story Festival. She lives in Perthshire, and when she's not writing, she explores abandoned country houses and swims in freezing lochs. Helen's previous novel, Ghost, was published by Fledgling Press in 2018. Her new novel, Too Near the Dead, is, if possible, even more frightening. I think that's fair.
I hope so.
Yeah. So, should we have a look at the book trailer?
Yes, right. I'm going to start the book trailer, hopefully.
Sometimes it's terrifying loving someone this much. For Fen Monroe and her fiancé James, it is a dream come true. An escape from London to a beautiful house in the stunning Perthshire countryside. Bardew House is modern, a building with no past at all, but someone walks the grounds, always dressed in lavender. Under a lichenous stone in an abandoned graveyard, a hideous secret lies buried, and at night, Fen is tormented by horrifying dreams. Someone wants Fen's happiness, and nothing is going to stop them, not even death.
Right, and that's me back again.
Okay.
Well, I hope that you could see that, but if you couldn't see it, then it's also on my books page.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to ask you a few questions. I'm not going to ask you too many because I don't want to be guilty of plot spoilers, but I do have to ask you about the opening chapter, which is the most horrific description of a live burial. Why do you write this stuff? Why on earth do you write this stuff? Is it a phobia of yours?
It is. You would notice over my books that all my phobias about different ways of dying appear. There's burning to death, falling from a high place, and being buried alive are all things that really, really scare me. So I put them into my books, and I think that the reason that people do this, and it, not just me but anybody, is that kind of there's two types of person. There's the people that if they're frightened of something, they just don't want to think about it, don't want to look at it, just don't want to know. And then there's people like me who want to look at it and sort of want to look at it in a controlled sort of way. So I think that's why I do it, because it frightens me. I want to look at it and I want to think about it, if that makes sense.
It does, yes. Yes, and make other people think about it.
Yes, and make other people think about it.
Yeah, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Aside from the supernatural material in the book, some really traumatic things have happened in Fen's history. There are important parts of her these are really important parts of her background, and they're horribly vividly described. To what extent are these elements autobiographical?
Yeah, my mother's not watching this because because the parents in this book are definitely kind of the worst parents I've ever written, and no, it's not autobiographical. But I think that things that have happened to you in your life, not necessarily by the type of people you've written in the book in the same relationship to yourself, but other people who've treated you in this way or that, then sometimes the way that you feel about that is reflected in what you write. So, for example, I don't have a brother who's died, but when I was a young woman, I had two or three friends who died in their 20s. And the feelings about Stephen in the book are probably partly reflect how I feel about that. So
Yes.
it's not exactly autobiographical, but it comes from a place of sort of knowing how that feels.
Right. Yeah. What attracts you to the Gothic genre?
I didn't sort of start out thinking that I was going to write Gothic. I just have always been drawn to supernatural, anything with folklore in, gloomy old buildings type of thing. And it wasn't until relatively recently that I actually realised that was a genre at all. I did a MOOC, an online course with the University of Stirling about the Gothic. And to be honest, before that, I was quite hazy about what the Gothic was. So I was reluctant to talk about it as something that I was doing because I wasn't really sure whether I was or I wasn't. I mean, there's Gothic architecture, there's the original Goths, there's the Goths in terms of sort of the fashion movement. And I wasn't really sure kind of where Gothic literature sat. But after I'd done that course, I felt a bit more confident about it. And I thought, well, yes, actually everything that I write, my short stories as well, has this sort of Gothic flavour to it.
So everything you write, you haven't written anything outside the genre?
Not much, a little bit. I've written a couple of crime stories, and I suppose those are a bit Gothic. I've written one short story that was kind of post-apocalyptic called Atmospheric Disturbances, that was in Tales a while ago, and I don't think that's all that Gothic, but I mean most of it I like is.
Fair enough. Where did you get the title Too Near the Dead?
That I have to thank Steve Duffy for that. So Steve, if you're watching, thank you again. He gets mentioned in the acknowledgements. It's a quote from Sir Walter Scott. He was staying in Glamis Castle, and they took him off to the wing that he was going to be sleeping in and locked him in for the night. And he said that he felt very uncomfortable because he was too far from the living and too near the dead.
Right.
And I thought this is a really superb quote, and I've been absolutely sort of kind of racking my brains to think what to call the book, and Steve suggested this, and I thought, well, it's perfect because also it's Scott, so it's Scottish, so yeah, it's absolutely perfect. But I don't think I'm going to write another one called Too Far from the Living.
I don't know.
Too Near the Dead.
Are the locations in the book real places? The ruined graveyard, Bardew House, the town, and so on?
Virtually all of them are. McBride's wedding dress shop isn't. That's imaginary, but there is a rather nice shop in the location, I imagine, for it, called J.L. Gill, which is a dry goods store, and also sells a marvellous selection of whiskies. So I kind of imagined McBride's being there, but pretty much everywhere else does exist. I mean, obviously Bardew House doesn't, but there are lots of deserted graveyards which are very similar to the ones in the book. And the chapel, and the fact that it was obviously a chapel and then made into a mausoleum, there's loads of churches like that here. The one which Ben and James go and look at one point in the book, and this is not particularly a spoiler because it's a potential wedding venue, is Tullibardine Chapel. So pretty much everywhere is real.
So that accounts for the really strong sense of place. What about the folk song? There's a folk song, and it's absolutely chilling, the wording of that folk song. Is it a real song?
It isn't a real song, actually. It's one that I made up, but it's kind of influenced by, I suppose, the tradition of using this sort of thing in eldritch literature, because there is a bit in, I think it's one of M.R. James's ghost stories has a bit where somebody is reading an account of Betton Wood, and it says that somebody knows no more of something rather than that which walks in Betton Wood knows why it walks or why it cries.
Yes.
And those sort of kind of quoted poetry and songs and stuff like that, I quite like that because I think it represents something which is kind of buried in people's psyche. They, because it's a song, it's not exactly practical. Emotionally, it's there.
Yes.
Lurking in a vague sort of way.
Yes. That makes sense. So that sort of answers the next question, actually, which is about the sense of place. You've lived in Perthshire for 10 years. Um, how intrinsic is it to the story? Could you have written the story and set it somewhere else?
It would be difficult to set it somewhere else. I mean, I imagine that you could set it kind of further in the Highlands of Scotland. I don't really think that you could set it in, you know, a populous part of England, because there's so many aspects. I mean, there's the fact that if there was a ruined graveyard in a very highly populated area, I think people would have swarmed all over it. There's no way that people wouldn't have looked at it before and wouldn't have kind of examined it or fenced it off or something.
Yeah, quite.
Yeah, and I think as well that what Scotland represents for Fen in the book is quite important as well.
Yeah.
So I think it would be very hard to set it somewhere else.
Tell me about the cover design. What does the white flower mean?
Yes, the cover design, which I think is front in the video. The flower is from a thing called an immortelle, and this is a kind of Victorian grave decoration. So what you will typically have is kind of not just one flower, but a kind of a whole bouquet of them, and maybe a little bird, and sometimes clasped hands as well. And all of it's made out of this kind of white china, so it's very funereal. And over the top there would be a glass dome to kind of protect it, and over the top of that there would be a kind of wire cage to prevent the glass from being broken. And I mean, I imagine that you have these in England as well, but I've seen quite a few of these in Scottish graveyards, so it was obviously a bit of a thing. They usually are kind of a bit broken and dirty, but I still kind of find them kind of fascinating. It's a slightly more sort of delicate, kind of attractive sort of way of decorating a grave, rather than, you know, having a stocking great piece of granite or something.
Yes, much nicer than plastic.
So that's what the flower is. It's from an immortelle.
All right. Okay. There's one more question, which is from David Longhorn, which says, "Who are your favourite Gothic writers?" You've already mentioned M.R. James. Who are your other favourite Gothic writers?
Yes, I read that question and I've been thinking about it for several days. I think it's really hard to answer. I think that I tend to have favourite books rather than favourite writers. I mean, I absolutely love Rebecca. And I also really, really like Jane Eyre, which goes to show that I have terrible taste in heroes. Because
actually, Too Near the Dead, I was strongly reminded of both Rebecca and Jane Eyre as I read it. So that's
interesting.
Yeah,
the influences. Yeah, so those are big favourites of mine, and I've read both of those books many times, and I think they're real sort of go-to comfort reads. And yes, as you say, I mean, I love M.R. James. I never get bored of reading him at all. So I'd say it's sort of favourite books, really.
Sorry, phone going off.
No problem.
I think that's it. That's all the questions I've got. I've got lots more, but I think they give away the plot. So I'm going to over to you now.
Okay, so I'm going to do a brief reading, you may be glad to hear, from chapter 1 of Too Near the Dead, because I feel it would actually be hard to read anything from later without massive spoilers. So I'm going to read from chapter 1, and it's kind of an abridged chapter 1, because if I read the whole thing it would probably take me about 12 minutes and you'd all have died by then. So so this is what I'm going to read. First, sleep so profound that it is like death, without the smallest spark of consciousness to light the darkness, without the dimmest sense of the passage of time. I'm not myself. I'm nothing. Waking is ponderous and full of resistance, like struggling in a tar pit. I'm dredged up from sleep. It wants to suck me back down into itself. My eyelids are heavy, so terribly heavy. I lie there unmoving, thinking about opening my eyes, but not doing it, while the minutes ooze past, slow as syrup. The air is warm, perhaps a little too warm. There is a stale taste to it. My mouth is dry. Awareness is beginning to return to me like bubbles rising to the surface of dark water. It's normal for me to sleep on my back. I've always done it ever since I was a child. But the posture I've been sleeping in is a strange one. I've been hugging myself, I think. Am I hurt in some way? No, I'm not hugging myself, not exactly. My forearms are crossed over my sternum in an oddly formal way. My right hand is draped over the left. My fingers have a muffled feel to them, a lack of sensitivity. It takes me a few moments of rubbing my hands together to realise that I'm wearing thin gloves. Surprise finally forces my eyes open. I expect dim light. Instead, there is blackness, a darkness so absolute that for an instant I think I've been struck blind. I squeeze my eyes shut and see the tiny sparks produced by my own retinas, but when I open them again, there is nothing but black. I can feel the first stirrings of alarm. Calm down, I tell myself, it's just very dark. There are no street lights here. There should be something though, shouldn't there? I open my eyes as wide as I can, straining to see some dim outline of the room, but I can't pick out a single thing. It's quiet too. My own breathing, a little accelerated, is loud in my ears. There's an oddly resonant quality to it. Switch on the bedside lamp, that's the obvious thing to do. I always sleep on the same side of the bed and the lamp should be on my left. All I have to do is reach out and feel for the switch on the cord. I start to unfold my arm to reach out, but almost immediately my elbow comes into contact with a hard surface. The bedside table and the lamp are not there. I try to make sense of this. Is it possible that I've moved around so much in my sleep that I'm actually lying across the bed, pressed up against the wall? I try to stretch out with my right arm to feel the mattress beneath me. When my right elbow hits a hard surface too, I freeze. Calm down, just think about this. Have I somehow rolled right off the bed during the night without waking myself up, so that I'm lying jammed between the bed and the bedside cabinet? I try to wriggle in the space, to twist my shoulders with no effect other than a crisp rustling sound. I turn my head from side to side and there is a crackle of fabric there too. My tenuous grip on my own composure is fading fast. I can feel myself sliding towards a black pit of hysteria. Unable to move my upper body, I kick out instead, and almost immediately my foot hits something. In spite of the immediate impulse to flail like a trapped animal, at some level it registers that I have shoes on. I'm not barefoot, as I undoubtedly was when I got into bed. I can tell this from the hard little knocking sound my foot makes when it strikes whatever is above it, and from the way the impact travels through my toes without causing them any actual pain. I have an image then in my head of a doll carefully dressed up and wrapped in tissue paper and placed in a box. I am not a doll, but there is only one other situation I can think of in which a fully dressed figure could be enclosed in a space like this one, and I don't want to consider that. I'm afraid I will lose all control. I lie perfectly still for a while. I think the thing that has prevented me losing control so far is the sheer improbability of the situation. It has to be a mistake. There has to be something I'm failing to grasp. There is one piece of the puzzle that I don't have yet. Still, I don't move straight away. If there is something unthinkable to face, I want to have those last few moments of ignorance before it bursts in on me. So I lie there and listen to the sound of my own breathing and feel the gentle motion of my chest rising and falling. The air still has that stale taste, and it seems to me that it is less refreshing than before. I have to draw in a little harder to get enough of it. At last I put up my hand hesitantly and test the space in front of my face. In all the time I've been lying here, it hasn't got any easier to see. My eyes haven't adjusted because there is absolutely no light. The darkness above me tells me nothing. It might go on forever, like the vast reaches of outer space. It doesn't though. My fingertips meet a flat, hard surface. I let them skate over it, testing for edges, finding none. Then I put the palms of both hands against it and push as hard as I can, to no effect. I'm breathing really hard now, sucking at what little air is left. I pound on the surface above me. Hey! I shout as loudly as I can, almost deafening myself in the enclosed space. Let me out! Let me out! I yell and yell until it isn't really words anymore, nor even vaguely human sounding. It's the sound of an animal dying in a trap. I struggle and fight, but there isn't room for anything. I only succeed in bruising my forehead on the hard surface above me. The air is running out. I'm going to die. I've been buried alive.
That's horrific.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
So I was going to kind of finish with that unless there are any other questions. So I don't know if there was room for comments here, but is anybody, can we check that? My daughter, who's carefully manning the Facebook page, could just have a look and see whether there's any questions. I guess not.
No.
No. Well, if there are any questions and I've missed them, then I will gladly look in the discussion bit afterwards and answer them anyway. Oh, I see my husband is bringing me a large scotch to celebrate.
I do.
So, thanks very much for listening and slange. Right, thank you.